I would like to warmly welcome you to this first webinar for this year. 2 months have gone by since we had our last webinar. This is the consecutive webinar, the one that follows the role of wild boars in African swine fever. Today, we will talk a bit more about the relevance of wild boars in the spread of ASF and the management of AFS in boars and other wild animals, particularly focusing on the role of hunters. Today, we will have experts that will share their experiences, uh, the experiences they have gained in their countries. This is just an initiative, remember this. An initiative that we have within the framework of GIFSTAC. This is an interagency initiative with the participation not only of ICA, but also CARAVET, CAFSA, OMSA, CAMS, CVP, USDA, OITSA, OPEC, and others. I would also like to remind you that this is a webinar that it has simultaneous interpretation into all 4 languages, Spanish, English, French, and Portuguese, and is being broadcast or streamed via social media. So please, we are on Facebook and YouTube, and well, I would like to urge you to, in the chat, indicate where you are from, what institution. It is important for us to keep a record of the different institutions participating in this series of webinars. A bit later on, we will share the link that houses all the webinars on the platform. And later on, we will share a link for you to respond to a brief survey. Without further ado, we have Katia Martinez, Rocio that are part of the coordinating team. Additionally, we see Eric Etter, who is also part of the coordinating team representing Caravet. And today, we will have the first presentation. I would not want to take further time to jump into this webinar. We will begin with the first presentation. This will be Greg Frankowiak. Did I pronounce that correctly? I don't know. I hope so. He is a wildlife biologist, and he works with the wildlife division at USDA. Before occupying his current position, he was involved in the surveillance of these wildlife species in the United States. He currently provides operational and technical support to the state programs that are in charge of examining the damage caused by these wild boars. He will refer to the U.S. experience in legislating and managing the surveillance of wild pigs or boars by hunters. So, Greg, the microphone is yours to start your presentation. Go ahead.
All right, excellent. Hello, everybody. My name is Greg Frankowiak. I'm a staff wildlife biologist for Wildlife Services National Feral Swine Damage Management Program. So I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing me to present this morning, and also thank you to everyone for being interested in Wildlife Services' role in managing disease surveillance of feral swine in the United States. For those of you who don't know, Wildlife Services is a program within USDA that prioritizes resolving conflicts between wildlife and people through wildlife damage management, minimizing airport and wildlife hazards, disease surveillance, and invasive species control, such as wild pigs. And so the National Feral Swine Program supports the removal of feral swine across the U.S., including the islands of Hawaii, as well as U.S. territories, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. But with our National Feral Swine Program, there's also a disease component to the program, and our disease component is responsible responsible for overseeing surveillance of foreign animal diseases in feral swine that, if found, could disrupt pork production and trade in the United States. So what I'm going to be talking about today is just a little bit of an overview of the history of feral swine, some of the legislation that has been brought up in the United States because of the presence of wild pigs, the role hunters have in surveillance, how we as an agency manage disease surveillance and report it, as well as what we've found over the years, and also what our agency and USDA as a whole can provide hunters such as resources. So starting off, first, feral swine were first brought into the United States, the continental United States, in the 1500s, primarily in the 1530s by explorers such as De Soto. And ever since then, there has been more introduction of pigs to the mainland. But in the last 20 to 30 plus years, we've seen an increase of wild pigs throughout the invaded range. And so, even though wild pigs have a very high fecundity and reproductive rate, their expansion is also due to escapees from farms, whether they're accidental, or they could be released by farmers as well who don't want to manage them anymore. But there's also another piece of the puzzle where there's a large portion of human movement, purposefully, of moving pigs from areas where they're found into new novel areas. And so, see, we've really seen an expansion from the early 80s to today. And so, as you see right here in the blue, this is some of the distribution of feral swine in the early 80s, 1982. You can primarily see that they were found in the southeastern United States as well as California. But due to movement across the United States, you can see that they're expanding. And a lot of this movement is from people wanting to bring pigs into novel areas so they can establish population and they can serve as an opportunity to hunt, whether recreational hunting and sport hunting for large wild boars, or to set up operations where they can lease their land and make money off of other individuals wanting to hunt wild boar as well. And so, as we've seen, this is the current known range and distribution of feral swine right now. Now, the image shows a little bit of an impact in reduced distribution of feral swine because Wildlife Services and the National Feral Swine Program have really pushed hard into setting back in eradicating and controlling the expansion of wild pig populations. So, even though our goal is to prevent the expansion of wild pigs, we also, as an agency and as a country as a whole, really need to be conscientious of the diseases that feral swine can have and the impacts. And this really came to our attention in the summer of 2021. African swine fever that hasn't been detected in the Caribbean in decades, it was detected in the island of Hispaniola in both the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And this is really concerning to the United States because two of our territories, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, are in really close proximity to Hispaniola. And so what we're concerned about is ASF could come in contaminated pork products, if you will, on illegal boat landings or legal boat landings or an aircraft, what have you. There was a really high risk of pork products that could be contaminated coming into these islands. And the impacts could be huge because in early 2017, there was a really large potbelly pig problem on the island of Puerto Rico. After Hurricane Maria hit, a lot of potbelly pigs were released or escaped, and they established very large populations in these urbanized areas of Puerto Rico, where if contaminated pork products were to come into the islands, there was a really high chance that these potbelly pigs could come in contact with those pork products and consume them, and then begin the spread of African swine fever on U.S. soil. So, beginning with legislation, one big piece of legislation that began in Puerto Rico is the establishment of a protection zone. So, a protection zone was set up around Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this federal order was to suspend any interstate movement of uncooked swine products out and raw products out of Puerto Rico and USVI to the mainland. We suspended that just to minimize any kind of risk of ASF spread from the Caribbean to the mainland. And so, even though Puerto Rico and USVI are members, are part of the United States, the citizens of there, or when individuals are traveling between the mainland and the islands, they were treated kind of like international travel, where there was a thorough inspection of the luggage and all the cargo to ensure that there was no raw or uncooked pork products that might be carrying ASF. But on the mainland, wild pigs are seen a little different. Since their establishment to the mainland in the 1500s and wild pigs have expanded, different states within the country kind of see feral swine in different classifications, which provides different opportunities for hunters. So, what we see is in some states, we consider wild pigs as game species. These are species where the state can make money by individuals purchasing license through state agencies, and they can hunt pigs, and individuals can hunt pigs on federal, state, or private land. But as exotic species, there's a lot more novelty to that. And that's where individuals might want to pay to go hunting a large boar, if you will, to mount on the wall in high fence hunting operations. So with that, individuals can go, they can spend money in their state agency or private property and hunt feral swine. In other states, such as the Southeast, they're considered a nuisance, invasive, or wildlife species where you may not necessarily need a hunting license to dispatch them on the landscape, especially if you're trying to prevent disease spread from your cattle or trying to protect your agriculture from the damage that wild pigs cause. So with that, there's hunters have different opportunities if they want to go hunt them as game, or if you just need to remove feral swine to protect your belongings and your property. But within states, what we're seeing is there's a lot of difference in the movement of feral swine also. So in states such as Texas, you're allowed to move wild pigs within states to take to wild pig holding facilities or slaughterhouses, or you can collect them and transfer them and make money out of high fence hunting operations for your exotic and novelty hunts, if you will. But a lot of states that don't have very large feral swine populations, we do find it is illegal to move feral swine in those states. And that's because a lot of states are working to prevent the spread and the movement of feral swine on the landscapes and introduce them to new areas. Again, there's a lot of human movement in illegal movement of feral swine by humans in the United States because individuals want to move them to new areas to hunt them or possibly make money off them by leasing their land. But there's some risk to it. There could be some incidental spread that these wild pigs have put out on the landscape, and they could spread disease to other wild pigs or to wildlife, humans, pets, and livestock. But so, what are the roles that hunters serve when it comes to disease surveillance in the United States? Well, for us, hunters serve as an early detection resource for finding dead or sick pigs on the landscape. Hunters who are pursuing game are going to find themselves in really remote, rugged terrain in maybe areas of thick vegetation. In these areas, you're likely going to find maybe some sick or dead animals. So when hunters are out there on the landscape, they're going to be the first to observe wild pigs that could be displaying symptoms of African swine fever. Or as they move around the landscape pursuing game, they're going to be the first ones who detect any kind of mass mortality event and come across carcasses and a lot of the terrain where the general public just would not typically find themselves. But even though hunters serve as an early detection resource for us, they really do not play much of a role in disease surveillance. A lot of the game that wild, or a lot of the dispatch pigs that are taken by private entities, they don't take the time or necessarily have the resources to pull samples out from pigs. They don't know where to take them. Can they handle the samples properly? What have you? But also, what we need to keep in mind is hunters may not want to sample the pigs that they are harvesting in fear that if a disease was detected, they might lose the opportunity to keep pursuing and recreationally hunting pigs. So, how do we surveil for pigs? Well, here in the United States, wild pig control and disease surveillance is primarily performed by the USDA, and particularly our agency, Wildlife Services. So, not really private or sport hunters. This allows us to have a uniform approach across the country to collect samples. We're able to get on a multitude of properties throughout the United States or within states. We have highly trained individuals that can not only dispatch pigs to protect hunters and resources, but quickly collect samples, collect all the metadata, and be able to get them set up for triage to the laboratories. And we have a wider breadth of samples across U.S. soil. We sample feral swine in about 30 U.S. states including the island of Hawaii and the 3 U.S. territories, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. But when it comes to surveilling for African swine fever, we have three main disease surveillance streams. First off, having the protection zone around Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, we really started a campaign after the detection of ASF and Hispaniola of really reducing the number of urban swine in the big cities of Puerto Rico, as well as on the island of USVI. And we're working our way into removing pigs in more remote and agricultural areas as well. As these pigs are being removed, we are also collecting samples to detect any foreign animal diseases, such as African swine fever and classical swine fever. And so that began in August of 2021, just shortly after the detection of ASF and Hispaniola. Moving forward, we really wanted to protect and surveil the mainland United States for African swine fever as well. So through paired sampling, both PCR and antibody-based diagnostic, we detected 12 U.S. states that could be a very high risk of ASF introduction. And so with those 12 states, we also wanted to protect the border between the U.S. and Mexico, as well as the western border of Florida. So that is known as our CONUS surveillance, or our continental U.S. Moving forward, we also wanted to, as Wildlife Services and Feral Swine Program, we also wanted to expand our disease surveillance towards our normal national disease surveillance efforts. All across the country in our 30 states and U.S. territories, when feral swine are removed, a subset of those pigs have serum collected from them, and we sample them for multiple diseases. It was classical swine fever, swine brucellosis, and pseudorabies. But now, beginning April 1st of 2024, we started doing antibody-based diagnostics for African swine fever. We also have the morbidity and mortality surveillance routine going on across the nation as well. If pigs being dispatched off the landscape are looking sickly or they're found dead, we start the first steps to a foreign animal disease investigation, where Wildlife Services works with veterinary services and the state animal health official to determine, do we want to collect samples? Are we going to set out, send these samples quickly to the lab? Let's get the results reported quickly, and let's keep our eyes open for any other sick pigs. So now that we have these three disease surveillance streams for African swine fever in a protection zone on the continental U.S. in our very special 12 states, as well as our national surveillance efforts, what have we found so far since we really started expanding our efforts since mid-2021? Well, since we began our surveillance efforts in the protection zone in 2021, over 6,100 wild pigs have been removed off the island of Puerto Rico. And of those, around 3,600 of those dispatched pigs, they were sampled for African swine fever and classical swine fever. To date, none of those animals have shown to be positive. So as of right now, we have no detection on the island of Puerto Rico of African swine fever. However, we are still maintaining our efforts in removing feral swine and collecting samples. In the neighboring islands, still in the protection zone of the U.S. Virgin Islands, we don't have as big of a feral swine presence. And the islands tend to be rocky and steep terrain, rugged terrain, thick vegetation. And even though we don't have the presence of feral swine like we do in Puerto Rico, we are still going through and removing escaped individuals. And since 2021, we have removed 20 individuals and have sampled 15. And just like Puerto Rico, so far, we do not have any detection of any foreign animal disease, such as African swine fever and classical swine fever. Moving on to our next efforts in our very special 12 states, we have our surveillance began in May of 2022. We have collected samples from 10 of those states. So far, there is not a large wild pig presence along the border in Arizona and New Mexico. These 10 states you see here is where active removal and active surveillance are occurring. But we also do have the 2 states of Arizona and New Mexico, where we are always looking for wild pigs along the border to remove just to minimize any kind of risk. Since our efforts began, again, in May of 2022, we have removed over 18,000 individuals, nearly 19,000 individuals out of very high-risk counties, 99 of them, since our efforts began. And to date, similarly to the protection zone, we do not have any detection of foreign animal diseases such as African swine fever and classical swine fever. Moving on to our national feral swine disease surveillance, these are efforts that began in 2006. And this is where once pigs are removed from anywhere across our 30 US states and 3 US territories, a subset of them are sampled using antibody-based diagnostics to test for diseases. Here you can see our 2024 map of the known invaded range of wild pigs in the United States. And you can see here in the bubble map, that's where all of our efforts are. That's where we are removing pigs on the landscape and actively surveilling. And we can see what diseases are on the landscape that could impact our U.S. trade and our pork industry. In FY24 alone, we have surveilled over 10,000 pigs for African swine fever as well as classical swine fever. But we also do search for, monitor, and surveil for 2 other diseases that could impact humans, pets, wildlife, and livestock. And that's pseudorabies virus and swine brucellosis. So looking at the map here, we can see that we always have around a 20% prevalence of pseudorabies virus and swine, and about 6% swine brucellosis prevalence throughout the years. We like to constantly monitor that through wild pigs because diseases are not normally found in our commercial stock. So we want to make sure that no diseases that are found in wild pigs can easily spill over into our domestic stock, if you will. Now, moving on to our morbidity and mortality surveillance. This is our surveillance system where if a pig is found dead or sick on the landscape, it can be dispatched easily, and we can collect samples such as spleen, tonsils, blood, and serum, and quickly send to the lab just to ensure that we don't have any foreign animal disease such as ASF, CSF, or foot and mouth disease on the U.S. soil. And since we started this in 2019, we've had 33 feral swine found sick or dead on the landscape. That could have been from anything. And so far, all of our samples have been negative for any foreign animal disease. And so this is one way that we work really closely with our partners and veterinary services, as well as state agencies with their swine and state animal health officials to really work together to ensure that everything is good and that we don't have nothing that we don't need in wild pigs here in the U.S. So getting back to hunters, even though that they serve as an early detection system for any foreign animal disease on the landscape or coming across carcasses or sick or dying pigs, we want to ensure that they have all the resources and information that they need to report and or maybe help prevent any diseases that could be here on U.S. soil. So one resource is USDA's campaign called Protect Our Pigs, which here's the website right here. You can just Google USDA Protect Our Pigs on any search engine. And it really focuses on foreign animal diseases such as African swine fever. And going to this website, you can find a whole bunch of resources that are pertinent to farmers and veterinarians, as well as hunters. And this provides information of who they can report feral swine in new areas or any sick or dying pig on the landscape. But it also provides information on how hunters can help mitigate and lessen any risk of spreading foreign animal diseases such as African swine fever. And this provides an easy to read and follow guidance on cleaning your game properly, cleaning your clothes and equipment efficiently and properly, and what to do with your game, and trying to stay away from domestic farms, if you will, just to ensure that that you can minimize any risk of spreading diseases from the field out to domestic stock. Moving forward, we also have a campaign here with the National Feral Swine Program and Wildlife Services called Squeal on Pigs. And this campaign is meant to really inform the public also on feral swine, the damage that they cause, but also primarily reporting feral swine in areas where they typically aren't found. So it's a reporting and early detection system as well. And so individuals can report if they see feral swine while going on hikes, or if they see sick or dead pigs on the landscape, just like hunters. And what's very nice with this is not only is it a web page, but we've also been able to create Squeal on Pigs to be a mobile app. So if you're out hiking and you have this app, and you see feral swine on the landscape, you can report them and write how many did you see, respectively the sex or age. You can use the GPS in that map to record the exact location that you found individuals. And so, wrapping up, here with Wildlife Services and the National Feral Swine Program and the role of hunters, legislation makes managing pigs and implementing hunter-based surveillance very difficult. Again, hunters in different states, wild pigs are seen differently as a game species or as an exotic species to hunt or a nuisance species. Again, hunters may not also want to surveil wild pigs because they don't want to lose a chance of a disease being detected and them losing their opportunity to hunt. So while Wildlife Services is performing the surveillance, it allows for uniformity across the nation. But again, hunters do play an important role in an early detection system of finding wild pigs on the landscape. We do provide, as USDA, resources, as I just mentioned, opportunity to learn about wild pigs, the damage they cause, how to report them, and what to do to better mitigate any kind of risk of disease spread. And so, with Wildlife Services, we plan on continuing surveilling wild pigs as we remove them off the landscape, as well as working with our state partners for any kind of incidents to ensure that no diseases get spread and that we can detect them very quickly. So anyways, my name is Gregory Frankowiak. Again, I'm a Wildlife Services National Feral Swine Damage Management Program. I'd like to thank you all for being here today and listening to my talk. And please provide any questions. Thank you for your time.
Muchísimas gracias, Gregory.
Thank you
Excelente
very much, Gregory.
presentación.
Great presentation.
Creo que es muy
I
importante destacar
believe that it's very important to highlight what you said at the end, the role of hunters in early surveillance and African swine fever and other diseases is very, very important. So I'm going to take advantage of this moment now to say that we have here in our audience the insight from Venezuela, SAC from Chile, UNL from Argentina, the National University from Argentina, the National Hunters Association from Uruguay. So good to have the Hunters Association here with us. We have the USDA, SENASA from Peru. We have the Ministry of Agriculture of Guyana. We have the Forest Research Institute in Bariloche, Argentina. We have the Regional Union of Swine Producers from Jalisco who are here. We also have
así que, pues, como pueden ver, en estos webinars tenemos variedad de...
we have a series of webinars and there's a wide variety of participations, as you can see. And we urge you to disclose these, to invite other institutions to join these webinars. These are not only for the public sector, but for all the sectors that have an important role in prevention and control of cross-border diseases, as is the case of ASF. We're going to continue with our next presentation by Gustavo Alberto Castro Rosa. He is a veterinarian. He graduated in the School of Veterinary Sciences of Uruguay. He is a deputy professor in charge of the academic unit of farm animals of that same school. He is also a technical officer of General Direction of Livestock Services of the Ministry of Livestock, Agriculture and Fisheries, and he's also a national focal point for wild animals, and he is also of the Permanent Veterinarian Committee. Dr. Gustavo is going to bring over the experience from the Southern Cone in relation to the role of wild hogs in Africa in swine fever and other diseases. Go ahead, Gustavo. Hello, good morning. Greetings to the organizers for the invitation to participate, and it's a pleasure to be with you and tell you about our experience. I'm going to be presenting about the Uruguayan experience, not of the Southern Cone. It would be too daring to speak about the whole Southern Cone, but I'm going to speak about Uruguay only. Can you see my presentation? Yes, we can see it perfectly well. Doctor, can you speak louder and slower, please, so that the interpreters can hear you? I'm going to talk about the role of hunters in health surveillance for diseases of wild hogs here in Uruguay, the experience that we have here. The position here would be to discuss a bit what are we referring to when we talk about wild hogs in Uruguay, then talk about health surveillance of these wild hogs. And finally, center in the role of hunters, the role that they have in this surveillance. And when we touch upon those previous points, I'm also going to refer to the role of hunters. Simply here in Uruguay, like in most of the countries in America, wild hogs we always had because the domestic hogs brought over by Portuguese and the Spanish became wild really quickly. You see here this drawing from the end of the 18th century. You see there the two wild hogs taking advantage of the byproducts left behind. There is a turning point in the topic of wild hogs when in the decade of the 1920s, where the president here in Uruguay, he had a farm in the southwestern area of the country, and he introduced directly from the Caucasus in Europe, the European wild hog. And as you see here, this picture is from the United States magazine Life. This is a picture in 1991, and this is a picture of one of these wild hogs brought directly from Europe. Even though there were some wild hogs that had become feral, the situation became more complicated when these boars were introduced. And why? Because these boars that are here in 1920 are easily spread out or escape or are intentionally brought here. And in a short time, they colonized the whole country. In the border with Brazil, as you can see here in this other map in red in 1989, we see the first sightings on the Brazilian side in the Jaguarol River. As Uruguay has a favorable weather, temperate almost all year long, boars do not have any natural enemies. We do not have big cats that can feed from them. They have refuge areas which could be favorable, like these areas, grasslands. And since the 70s, 80s, 90s, the country has much developed the forest industry. And these forests also became a refuge for these European wild boars. And together with this, these wild boars crossed with domestic pigs. In Uruguay, the swine production is not too significant. It's a secondary product, and 80 or 90% of producers in Uruguay are small-scale producers that have much contact with wild animals, and in this case, with a wild boar. So what we have today in our country is sightings of boars and wild hogs throughout the whole map. The map that you see here to the left is the map of Uruguay, and the black dots are sightings of boars and wild pigs in the whole country, just in the department of Montevideo. That's where we have the capital city. And what we are not totally sure about is what is the density of animals. That figure of density there, placed there, 0.52 to 1 times 17 animals per square kilometer. That is a figure from the 90s, and it needs to be adjusted necessarily. What we have in our in wild areas today is the picture in the middle. It is crossbreeding of the wild boar brought from Europe, crossed with the domestic pig. We sometimes have some boars, and we also have feral pigs that run away from the farms and they get introduced into the forest. This is what we call wild hogs, and it's the objective population of our surveillance. Down here, I placed a picture of a peccary, which is a species of boar. It's a species that is autochthonous to our country. And in the second place, its hunt is not permitted. So this goes through a different channel, and there is no problem with this. The damages caused by these wild hogs caused that in 1982, this was declared a national pest and free hunt was authorized, transportation and anything else. This really facilitated surveillance, and this facilitates the participation of hunters in this activity. At the same time, these were called pests to agriculture in 2004, and they were finally in 2009 included in the invasive exotic species list. This is complied with countrywide, and this is favorable because other countries have standards just for some regions. And the situation might be different in different parts of the country, but here in Uruguay, it's all the same. In relation to health surveillance, even though since the 1920s, the animals have been present in our country, and we do not have, they were already causing trouble, but we do not have much background or any records or anything, or any tests that could have been done on the pigs. Health surveillance, as we do it today, was begun to be done systematically since 2010 with a group from the University of the Republic, which is called ProHub. And they began going to hunt events, to hunt parties, to take samples, and to begin working on their first studies. This surveillance took place in collaboration with other public and private organizations, amongst them the Ministry of Livestock, that I'm a member of as well, and with hunters organizations. We've already had, always had hunters here in Uruguay. The thing is that since 2017, we have the advantage of having comprised a National Hunters Association in Uruguay. And we have a very good relation with them. And this facilitates things because we have several organized people with whom to organize these activities. We do this surveillance, which are from WOAH, and we have reported in time and form zoonotic diseases, which are the diseases that can infect the hunters themselves when manipulating animals, or people who consume products from boars, because everything that's hunted is consumed. And then the diseases that could be transmitted by the boars themselves to species, as is the kind of the pig or cattle, with a clear example of tuberculosis. The sample collection is quite simple for us because we do that countrywide in parties where hunters get together. This is a sports competition, and there are prizes here. And there we have a short time in a specific area, a number of animals where we can go and sample. We have here two colleagues from the university collecting samples of one of the largest parties that are organized, and there is another source of the samples, which are the hunters themselves, who, regardless of the parties that take place in a fixed time, they hunt every day of the year, and therefore we also have a flow of samples throughout the year. With these samples, we do different tests. This is a summary that I made just so as not to lose time. Here we have the data of the number of samples and the techniques used, and they're all available. Simply, we prepared a list of the diseases that were checked there and if they were present or not within the samples taken from feral pigs here in Uruguay. ASF was not checked for, but other diseases, we have brucellosis, foot-mouth disease, classic swine fever, brucellosis. We did not find the presence of these, but yes, of the others that are detailed above, like tuberculosis, toxoplasmosis, and respiratory swine disease. These are some of the diseases found. And with these results, we necessarily have to disclose, to make this general, because this is one of the objectives of the surveillance. Disclosure is something that we do within the academic scope with the publications, which could be the book that we have here, or scientific papers that published in national or international magazines. But also we have some other places where we can disclose information, which makes us exchange experiences with these groups that are working. Internationally, we have developed a workshop since 2016. And the word workshops, there is something there that you can care for and look at all the presentations that have been done since 2016. Some areas for discussion for people to bring over their experience. We have had some of these seminars with people that work at USDA, like we also have Virginia Santiago from Brazil in the first seminar that we had near the border. We also had practical activities there. And at the national level, we have also developed a series of activities for disclosure of information for hunters. We have traveled, for example, this was done in a house where we sold fishing and hunting items. And the idea was to report on to the hunters the findings that we had, any issues that might arise with those findings, and the measures that needed to be taken in security for preventing this. And something else to disclose our work and where we have feedback with other technical experts is with regional working groups at the national level. In my case, I participate in two groups from the Southern Corn Permanent Committee and the group on wild fauna. And also there we have done these works. All the countries in the CVP have working experiences to a greater or lesser extent. It's very interesting to look at, and this way we more or less know what everybody's doing and what we can improve and if we can do work together. And specifically, the role of hunters for us is fundamental. The hunters are our eyes where we do not see, or at least we do not see every day. The first big function here is to be suppliers of samples, whether blood, organs, or whatever is considered necessary. The other thing would be the report of sightings of dead animals or any other findings in a wild context. The report of possible zoonosis, reporting about diseases that people might have and which probably might have been infected through contact with animals or by consumption of products. Recently, we were discussing with one of the hunters, and they had a friend who was hospitalized with a disease which was leptospirosis, which it is likely that he could have been infected by contact with these pigs. Also, the hunters as co-organizers of disclosure events that we have from our research projects, raising awareness among peers about biosecurity in hunting, not only with the products that are consumed, but also with the relationship that the products might have as byproducts of the hunting, like when using other species, like, for example, hunting dogs and other animals that might eat the byproducts of the hunt, raising awareness about biosecurity during hunting, and as awareness amongst peers about the species to be hunted. This is important because, as I said, we also do health surveillance in pecaries, that's species, but in this case, pecaries are not a species that is allowed to be hunted because it's an autochthonous species. We have tried to disclose this. Here in Uruguay, peccary was extinct until the beginning of the 20th century, and it was reintroduced to the wild in 2017. That reintroduction led to having these animals in the wild, and that some hunters went after them. So one of the functions that the hunters had was to raise awareness amongst their peers about what types of animals could be hunted and which could not. And the way of working we have with hunters is an agreement between the university and the National Hunters Association of Uruguay. There are other regional hunters organizations, and there are other independent hunters. We work with all, but we have a greater commitment with the Hunters Association of Uruguay. And then we have the WhatsApp group, which of course is something that now every activity has, where we have all types of communication. What I was telling you, not only providing samples, but also reporting other findings which might occur in the wild. Here, these are two screenshots. One of what they sometimes find when they are in the midst of their hunt. This is a case of a disease in domestic pigs, which is not so common, but in wild boars it's very common, and this is a parasite which is interesting to find. So that you can see our friend, the hunter that sent this picture, he himself decided to begin looking for this in internet, and together with the picture of this parasite, he sent us the life cycle. So this exchange that we have back and forth with them led to this. And I think that, well, my time is about to be over. I simply leave you here with our email addresses in case you want to enter into our group and our websites. This is I couldn't find any picture of hunters here in Uruguay, so I had to put one from abroad. Well, I believe that you all have to take a picture of yourselves to post it. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. Once again, the close relationship and the very important role that hunters can have in relation to prevention and control of cross-border diseases like African swine fever. Without further ado, I'm going to continue with the next panelist. I want to remind you that you can do your questions through the chat. You can do this through the general chat or through the questions chat that you have down here on the screen with all the possible alternatives that we have. And through our social networks also, please send us your your questions there. We are collecting them from our social networks, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. Please send us your questions because the questions will be left for the end. I am now going to be presenting Dr. Ferran Jordi. He is a veterinarian, 24 years of experience in international cooperation in tropical countries in animal health and in the production of wild animals, epidemiology of diseases, in the interface between wild fauna and livestock, like foot and mouth disease, African swine fever, and the diseases transmitted by ticks and zoonotic pathogens. Dr. Jordi is currently living in Montpellier, France. He works with CIRAD and he has participated in different projects on research in Europe, Africa, and Madagascar, studying the circulation of pathogens amongst hunted species and interaction amongst domestic and wild species. Dr. Jory is also an expert in epidemiology and ecology of infectious diseases that are around in wild fauna and livestock. He's also got experience working in Central America, Guatemala, South America, Brazil, and Paraguay, Western Africa, Benin, and Senegal, and in Central Africa, Gabon, and in Southern Africa, South Africa, and Botswana. So with this experience that our doctor has, he's going to be presenting about the experience of wildlife and the role of hunters in Africa and some European countries on African swine fever. Go ahead.
Ferran, ¿me puedes oír?
Can you hear me?
Doctor Ferran.
Dr. Ferran?
¿Sí me escuchan? ¿Aló?
Sí, ahora sí, ahora sí. Listo.
Can you hear me?
Mis disculpas.
Puede seleccionar
My apologies.
el francés.
Sí.
Si nos va a hablar en francés. Exacto.
If you wish, you can choose
Merci beaucoup,
French
pour votre
if you're going to be
présence,
speaking
cet
French.
après-midi pour moi, ce matin pour vous.
Thank you very
Donc,
much
fondamentalement, bon,
for
ça
being
fait
here.
24 ans que je travaille sur
It's
la
afternoon for me, it's the
africaine,
morning for you.
dans différents pays du monde, mais j'ai
Essentially,
eu
4 years ago, I have been working on African swine fever in different countries of the world, but I also had the opportunity of working with this disease in Europe. I have followed the evolution of the disease in Europe.
J'ai eu l'occasion de suivre un peu l'évolution de différentes activités qui ont été menées par les chasseurs.
My apologies, but Dr. Jory is frozen.
Et ça va être fondamentalement l'objectif de ma présentation.
Doctor Ferran,
Partager
solamente
ces
antes de
expériences.
que inicie. Listo,
Muy bien.
era que la pusiera en modo presentación. Gracias.
C'est fait. Merci beaucoup, Erika. Donc, bon, je vais vous parler d'une présentation très brève du virus et du rôle des suidés sauvages, en particulier des origines de la peste porcine africaine et les suidés sauvages en Afrique. Et après, je vais vous parler un peu de la dynamique de la peste porcine africaine en Europe et de pourquoi l'amplitude et l'importance de cette maladie chez les suidés sauvages, donc les sangliers en Europe, fait qu'il est important d'impliquer les chasseurs dans le contrôle et la gestion de cette maladie et les différentes expériences qui existent dans l'implication des chasseurs sur cette maladie et pour finir avec des conclusions. Donc bon, la peste porcine africaine, vous le savez tous, c'est une véritable pandémie porcine qui actuellement affecte plus de 80 pays dans le monde. Il y a différentes voies de transmission directes et indirectes qui compliquent énormément son contrôle. Tout ça, vous le savez déjà. Et particulièrement, le problème avec cette maladie, c'est que, un, il n'y a pas de vaccin, et deux, le virus est extrêmement résistant à l'environnement, et en particulier à la matière organique, ce qui fait que, bon, la transmission,
particularly to organic matter, and therefore the transportation and contamination of products makes it very difficult, or makes it, very easy to spread. The economic losses are devastating, as you well know. Not only millions of animals die because there's no vaccine, and above all, with the extremely drastic control measures that consist of systematically eliminating the animals, the infected animals, or susceptible to be infected. And this would cause enormous losses. This type of hemorrhagic fever does not affect human beings, but does affect some animals. And with the exception of the African swines, and this affects the feral swines in Europe and many other species of wild hogs in Asia. There are at least 3 species in Asia of these wild hogs. These are threatened and they are very impacted by the ASF. Now let us go to Africa. I will take advantage of my experience to share the origin of these animals in Africa. The African hogs are the only ones that are resistant to ASF, and this is explained by the fact that these swine, at least the one here to the left, is the main reservoir of the ticks, the arthropods. This tick here that is, as I said, is a tick, and there is a particular connection between 1,400,000 years that has existed for more than thousands and thousands of years, and throughout all this time, the virus and the ticks have coexisted in terrariums. And they stay on the animals in their early life stages, and there is another tick that could be infected with the virus and then infects the other one. The infected ticks will basically cause a viral infection, and this develops problems. This virus is very important, and after that, the virus remains in the tissue of these animals and does not produce produces virus to produce other animals, and the infection basically is produced by the bite of these infected ticks. This coevolution with the virus makes aquifers to have developed a innate resistance to this virus. They experience no symptoms when they infect. It is just a small bite, but they do share the space. And cause emergencies with this virus. And this will enter into the value chain of domestic swine. And this leads to what we normally see, causes a greater impact on so many countries. This virus, we see there are different strains of the virus, of the African swine fever. And there is one that in 2007 caused this pandemic worldwide, and that it infected millions and millions of wild dogs and wild boar. You will see in this presentation the spread of AFS, the wild boar in the Baltic countries, notice here, and then Poland gradually, and notice how it moved towards the Balkans, and then further west from Poland, its introduction into Germany. And in fact, in northern Italy, there was an incursion in Belgium in 2018. As you can see in this animation, it is very impressive to see how this spread throughout Europe. Currently, we see perhaps around 900 new cases per month in Europe. Just imagine, multiply this for a year. These are new cases on wild boar. In some of these countries, the virus was maintained in these wild boar populations. Before its introduction in Europe in 2007, it had not been seen. And then in the late 1960s, 70s, there was an outbreak, but had affected the southern part of Europe, but we had never seen these populations maintain over time. There was a second outbreak in 2007, and it expanded to Eastern Europe. And there, this remained there for a long time. And we can see this is permanent. The winters are very severe over there. So the carcasses remain there, and the virus then continues for several months in the frozen carcasses. When spring comes, well, the ice and snow melts, and other wild animals approach the carcasses, and as well as other mosquitoes that approach the carcasses, and this leads to perpetuate the disease in colder areas of Europe. Due to the situation of these winters in Central and Eastern Europe. Well, this contributes very much to this fourth cycle of the fever in Europe. And this is where the virus is maintained in the populations of wild boars. In Poland, for example, in 2014, ever since then, the disease has been circulating very actively in that country ever since then. So we see this permanent cycle of the virus, not only in the wild boar populations, but also in swine production in general. And due to this situation, the European community have tried to implement a series of measures to control the spread of this disease of these wild hogs. And the first phase was basically to have the core here of the infected area and have a physical isolation around this, a fence. And in this infected area, as I said, there is a fence to avoid the escape of these animals. After this infected area, we have in yellow the buffer zone with a minimal disturbance, and population management strategies are implemented there to keep.
Il y a une troisième zone qui est une zone de contrôle où on procède très souvent à une dépopulation active des populations de sangliers à travers une chasse intensive ou du piégeage. L'ensemble de ces mesures a porté un succès important et en conséquence une éradication de la maladie dans certains cas. C'est le cas de la République tchèque, où la maladie est rentrée, je pense que c'était en 2017. C'est le cas de la Belgique, où la maladie est rentrée en juin 2018. Et presque 3 ans.
That's the case of the disease 3 or 4 years later, and they have been able to eradicate the boar populations. And that's the same case of Sweden when this disease entered in 2023. And just like as with the application of these measures, they were able to eliminate it. These cases, success cases of these 3 countries are an exception more than the standard. In most of the other countries, the disease continues to be circulating regardless of the application of the measures. We have been able to control the spreading of the disease, which continues to be present in most of the countries where you see the images. Most of the measures, perhaps not the mapping, but the elimination or the reduction of boar populations in enclosed areas, and the management of the corpses, well, we have also had the support of hunters for this. Why? Because these people know really well the forests. They spend a long time in these open spaces, and they walk a lot around these forest services. for hunting, and this is a very well-structured community. As our colleague from Uruguay said, they have very strong associations structured locally, but also regionally, nationally, or beyond the borders. But hunters are no veterinarians. They do not know about health. We are facing a situation where we're going to be asking an organization that is concerned about the control of the disease, but we are involved in these activities to control diseases. And sometimes it is somewhat complicated, but I can say that this will depend on the situation of each country, of the socio-cultural situation of each country. In each country, there could be hunters, but also the situation and the reaction, how quick the reaction is, which is very important. But to be able to be successful in the control of diseases, that is the early detection of the disease and the speed of the implementation of all these measures is fundamental to be able to eradicate this disease. Now, what type of collaboration can we ask from hunters? Well, we saw this in the different presentations that we have had, the sample collection through hunting, what we call this surveillance, the detection of the remains or the corpses of the pigs where they die in the forests. And oftentimes it's the hunters that really know these forests well. They spend much time there, so we're going to ask them to support us in the location and detection of these dead animals and to help us with the samples for studying ASF virus, what we call passive surveillance, and also the reduction of boar populations through intensive hunting. To collect these samples through hunting, of course, there is a classic collection of blood when the animal was hurt. We have a wound at that moment, and it is relatively easy to be able to fill a little vial with blood for hunters, but sometimes they forget to do this, or sometimes they might have a problem that they are not carrying the necessary materials, or we have a cold storage chain issue when they are too far away, where there is no possibility of refrigerating, or there is no power. So part of the differences in different countries, we also have this method that we have tested and that we would like to share with you, and it is collecting this blood with absorbent paper. This works really well. It was confirmed a few years ago with colleagues from the Institute while doing research in Madagascar, and the virus is perfectly well detected when this is absorbed by the absorbent paper, and also this is very effective when the people do not have a clear notion about how to collect blood, and most of all when we are in very faraway places. We can also use different absorbent papers, different types of paper, like the one you're seeing here in the picture. These little papers that are shaped like a key. We also have this Wattman 3mm paper, which could be cut in smaller circles or squares. And also we have FTA cards, which are very useful to conserve this. So, and we would like to detect the viral DNA that is included. And it is also useful for serology, and this has the advantage that it is very easily conserved in a room temperature environment. Of course, there are several utilization advice. We shouldn't touch it with the fingers. It has to be sun-dried, as we can see here, before putting it in an envelope or a plastic bag. It can be conserved during several weeks at room temperature, and we are in a very far away place during several days. And of course, we can also conserve this in refrigeration or frozen for the different kinds of analysis at the lab.
Photos de prélèvement qu'on montre aux chasseurs pour leur montrer
There are
comment
some pictures that we have shown hunters for them to see how we collect this, how the absorbent paper must have absorbed blood really well. On the sides, we see what the hunters have to prevent, which is the picture on the left where the absorbent paper collected very little blood, or a sample that does not retain the virus. These are very effective methods. We must know that currently several tests, commercial tests like IDT and others, have already been calibrated to use these papers, and this facilitates to continue detecting this serologically because these have already adapted to these absorption papers. And just as is the case of different kinds of sera. As to the passive follow-up on boars, we have instructed hunters in relation to the remains of dead animals for early detection of the disease, but also to follow up on the disease during several months in a boar and wild pig population, or that has given good results, like when this disease was eradicated, as in Belgium and Sweden. But we must continue following up on the populations to confirm that, in fact, the disease is no longer circulating on wild populations. This is a very important approach that can be developed with hunters. It's clear that there are some constraints, but the thing is that we do not know how many dead animals we're going to be able to sample. We do not always find all dead animals, and this is very important to know because oftentimes animals are going to hide when they are going to die, or for example, that they no longer eat because they have a very high fever, that we're going to, they hide in very humid and very hidden places to go and die there. And therefore, it's very hard to find them afterwards for sampling. Just when the animal begins to decompose and the scavenger animals begin arriving, but we can normally detect 10% of these carcasses. Utilization of these is very important to be able to quickly detect the disease. Given all these difficulties, there are different approaches that we have attempted in Europe to improve the location of these remains. I would also like to say something about the effectiveness of the detection when we use passive or active surveillance. We have to know that we use active surveillance, that is in the detection of virus in animals that are being hunted, and in that case, prevalence does not go beyond 5 or 6% of the animals. If the disease is circulating, that is to say that prevalence is too low. Why? Because animals, well, that is to say that the hunters are going to have a difficulty to kill animals that are not in very good health. That is, when animals feel sick, they go and hide, and therefore they are going to find faster animals that are healthy. You can see here the comparison between the different active and passive surveillance methods in a country with the red line. And if we compare this with the detection of ASF on animals that were already found dead, that is the remains of the animals, the prevalence is 8 to 10 times higher of animals that we have found dead compared to animals that were just hunted. That is that in case of an early detection, we recommend to try to detect the disease in these dead remains instead of detecting that in animals that had just been hunted, because this method is much more effective to detect diseases. On the contrary, if we want to provide follow-up for the evolution of the disease, then we know that the disease is with active in the population, we can definitely recommend active surveillance. For the detection of carcasses, there is some difficulty for some of the animals. There is a difficulty for finding the animals to collect these carcasses. Normally, there's not much left of the dead animal, but the main issue is detection of the reason why these animals died. What we have tried to implement in Europe to improve the effectiveness of the detection of carcasses is to have permanent communication with hunters groups to be able to very quickly communicate with them whenever they find a corpse, a cadaver, and with these WhatsApp groups to expedite information and exchange of information to share this information. And the different stages for an animal like this when it is found. We have also tested mobile apps, somewhat similar to what was presented by the first speaker, to make communication easier. If we see that in wild boars, if we find a cadaver, a carcass, we have an option on the cell phone, to report the exact GPS point where this was found. This way we can transmit information to be able to sample and to remove this cadaver. We also have some interesting experiences in some European countries with trained dogs that are specialized to detect dead boars. Usually, dogs are very useful because they have a very well-developed sense of smell, and they can be trained to find human corpses. But we are applying some experiences currently because it has not always been that easy, because not all dog races have the capacity of being trained for boars specifically. It requires specific training to get them used to finding these boar carcasses. It could be quite tiresome for some of the dogs, and therefore the work sessions are limited in time, and there are not many people who own these dog breeds. So sometimes it's hard to find. There is an experience to improve the detection of these carcasses is doing this by computer. We have realized that animals, when they feel sick, they go and hide in those cold and humid places, so that way they feel better, since when they're suffering, they go and hide there, and they look for these types of habitats which are closed and covered. So we could calculate a probability that this number of carcasses found. So we go to areas where we will most likely find these corpses, and that way we increase their possibility.
Now, I would like to talk about the wild boar populations. When we talk to the hunters about these wild boars, they show great interest. However, that is not always the case, because hunters have understood that these are populations of animals that they are interested in basically on holidays, but they have to participate at different levels. Basically, we work with the hunters, with the army. Night vision tools have been used, but this is only possible for a certain time frame. Just imagine that when in a situation of crisis, just imagine, as is the case of Poland, where the disease has been circulating now for 11 years. At some point in time, we lower the guard and basically we do this gradually, and we cannot bring our snipers as quickly as possible to come and eliminate these or slaughter these animals. Basically, rewards are offered to the wild boar hunters, but this compensation could also have negative effects. For example, an over-declaration if they are paid for each for the carcasses. Basically, they address them or they slaughter them so that they look like a greater number. And basically, in some cases, they do not report them where are found in private property, and these are not reported because the authorities may come and carry out inspections. So there are many difficulties there. As we face a case like in Poland or Germany, the mobilization of hunters or to involve them in disease control activities, this basically becomes much more difficult because on one hand, we see that it is up to a certain point, but it represents an additional effort. And then it becomes much more difficult to mobilize all the group of hunters. Logically, there are participatory tools to motivate or encourage the hunters, information, meetings, brochures, posters, meetings, press campaigns, social media, and of course, incentives. All of these are methods that were tested in Europe and in other countries that have been more or less successful. Regarding the extension of this outbreak worldwide. But however, we do all agree that awareness of all the stakeholders is essential. There are many examples that we could mention. Tools that have been developed in different countries. And regarding the mobilization of hunters and control of ASF in Europe, well, there has been mitigation, but it is still a major problem, and we continue to fight against this issue continuously. I would say that collaboration with the network of hunters is basically built over time. Certain formalities and regular contact is basic. We could not just go ask them from one day to the next, or whenever there is a local issue. And then after that, just forget about keeping this regular contact based on the results obtained. The feedback is fundamental. This level of regular communication and contact over time is mandatory. Well, I am starting to wrap up now, saying that the experiences seen so far are variable, and there is really not a magical formula here, and I believe that all these experiences can be tested in the different countries, and they will gradually evolve, not always at the same pace in the different contexts. So this is what I wanted to share with you. I thank you very much for your attention. And if you wish, if you have any questions, I will be glad to answer. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ferran. Excellent presentation, very complete. This gives us a broader view of how to address, or how you have addressed in Europe, all this part of African swine fever, and with all the relationship that you have mentioned regularly over time with the hunters This cannot just be at the time of an emergency. With this, well, thank you very much. In a few more minutes, we will move into questions. We already have several questions in the chat. And we will end with the last presentation. More than a presentation, this is a summary of the experience and how it is. This is being addressed with feral swine in St. Lucia. Dr. Robbie Joseph, just a brief summary of her CV. She works with the Ministry of Agriculture at the National Agricultural Diagnosis Center in St. Lucia. She supports the veterinary services in the diagnosis of these animals and the work as other work as a microbiologist. Dr. Joseph loves antimicrobial resistance, AMR. Her master's was in microbiology at the University of Massey in New Zealand, where she invested the characterization of the effects of microbiological products. And she is currently focused on antimicrobial resistance and administrative programs, where she is part of two working groups, technical working groups in antimicrobial resistance for St. Lucia. And she hopes to continue to grow in this field through their research to continue working on AMR, and is also working and collaborating with the African swine fever project that we at ICA have together with USDA. So with this, Dr. Joseph, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Sí.
Okay. So good afternoon. Like I said, my name is Robin Joseph, and I work with the National Agricultural Diagnostic Facility in St. Lucia. I just wanted to give a brief summary. So far, all the panelists have given some very nice PowerPoint presentations. However, mine will just be a brief summary on what has happened in St. Lucia regarding the hunters and our efforts to detect African swine fever if it becomes present in St. Lucia. I just want to give a special thank you to Erica for allowing me to have this short talk. And hopefully in the future, I can provide a very nice PowerPoint like the others did, showing some of the pictures, etc., that we have put together from all the expeditions that we went or that we have endeavored on. So I just want to start off that we, in St. Lucia, we do not currently have, or we do not have at all, any native feral pigs or wild hogs or wild boars. What we have currently are domesticated pigs that have escaped the livestock markets and the pens, etc., and they're now just roaming free throughout our forest reserves in St. Lucia. So currently, we are unaware of the number of those feral pigs that are in St. Lucia, but we are aware that they are there, and we have seen it with the destruction of habitat, the destruction of forest reserves. They also feed on things such as the crops from the farmers. So we are aware that they are around. So all of this to say that we know that these pigs are in St. Lucia. We know that, these feral pigs are moving throughout the island. And we need to be aware, and we are currently working to assess the numbers that are in St. Lucia to begin with, as well as to understand what role they can play in the dissemination of African swine fever if it does get into St. Lucia, the disease. Currently, we do not have any legislation or regulations as it pertains to having hunters or hunting groups like I've seen with Europe and other countries. So it's not something that is explicitly organized. However, we do have a couple of groups in St. Lucia that actually carry out the hunting of those feral pigs. Nonetheless, we have actually collaborated with those teams. So here at the Ministry of Agriculture, we have collaborated with them to just collect some samples as it relates to the Proteinority project that we have endeavored or that we started alongside ECA. And we were happy to have this collaboration because those hunters actually are aware of the terrain and the areas where those pigs would. Sorry, I'm seeing someone's hand is up. Can you hear me?
No, Robin. Everything is okay.
Oh, okay. I saw someone's
Yes,
hand
thank you.
up. That's why I asked. Okay. Okay. So currently we have collaborated, like I was saying, with those feral pig hunters. And what we're doing now is to work alongside those hunters as well as the forestry department in St. Lucia to help us with gathering those samples. Like I said, this collaboration is very important because those hunters know the terrain in St. Lucia. They know the forest ranges very well, as I usually go out, but I'm not too sure of where those pigs would be hiding or where they would traverse frequently. So these people actually have an idea of where they would find these pigs. They are also very successful with their hunts. So they go very sporadically, which is sort of, it's a little ticklish because they don't have a set time. And like I said, this is not legislative, so they are not mandated to carry this out. They just do it for sport. And because of that, they go out during weekends, they go out basically anytime that they feel like going out. So we just piggyback on this initiative to get those samples. Now, when they do go out, they are very successful in that they get quite a few pigs with one hunt. So sometimes they get as many as 5 pigs per hunt, and this is quite good for sample collection purposes. They're also very quite skilled with their methods, and they also have the hunting dogs that they have trained to assist them with the collection of those. Well, not collection of the samples, but to actually hunt those pigs. But again, like I said, we actually use this opportunity to get some of those samples, like the blood, serum. We also collect things like lymph nodes, etc., or spleen that we can then use to process. Additionally, this is all good, but like I said, we do have a few constraints in St. Lucia, and this stems from, again, the sporadic activities. So they head out just on the weekend. Sometimes it can be quite a long trip, so they go from the early morning and then they return quite late at night. So that too can be quite difficult for us here to accompany them to those sites to get those samples ourselves. Again, it's a forest, the terrain is difficult, so it poses some challenges for us here in St. Lucia. However, we do try as much as possible to go out with those hunters to get that exposure so that we could understand how these pigs actually progress and how they move in the natural habitat, which would be in those forest reserves. So how can we remedy those issues? And I saw that quite a few persons have mentioned this. So the intention is to now get those the hunters to collect the samples on our behalf, because most of the time we're unable to actually go into the forest reserves to get those samples. What we would usually do is to intercept them when they get to a meeting point, and then we collect the samples, the blood samples from the region behind the eyes for the pigs, or sometimes we collect some spleen samples not the spleen, the lymph nodes that we would then use to process as whole tissue samples. So the next phase and the next thing that we hope to do is to actually carry out some training with those hunters so that they can actually collect the samples for us in field. And I'm quite I'm quite happy that someone mentioned the use of the absorbent Wortmann 5 paper, which is the filter paper to get those samples. I think that might actually be a better way of for them to collect those samples that we would need to carry out ASF passive detection methods. Additionally, we're hoping, I also noticed that the other panelists mentioned having some apps that could help with the geolocation of those samples. So again, I think that is actually a good idea that we can try to incorporate here in St. Lucia, so that when those hunters go out and they do get, for example, they get moribund pigs or carcasses of pigs, that they could actually put locations that perhaps the veterinarians, etc., could have an idea of where those pigs are, so that they could then come to investigate. Because like a previous panelist said, that the hunters are not veterinarians, so they would not know what to look for in particular. Maybe they might have a bit of an idea of, okay, this pig might be sick because of XY disease. But again, we might need a veterinarian to intercept to then give some more concrete sort of evidence and concrete solutions as to what has happened or what they suspect might be going on. Additionally, in addition to the collection of samples, we're also hoping that we can train them in the proper disposal of carcasses if they do intercept some within the forest ranges in the forest, so that they could have just a better setup in terms of how they get rid of those the pigs that they do find that might be moribund but not present symptoms of the ASF. So these are all things that we were hoping that we could train those hunters in. But for now, it's been a good experience with them, and we hope to continue throughout this month and next month to collaborate with them to get some more samples. But moving forward, the main thing is for the training in the collection of those samples that we would need to continue with our passive surveillance of ASF, since ASF is not present in St. Lucia. Thank you. This is basically what's been happening in St. Lucia as it relates to having the hunters available and how we have collaborated with them thus far. But like I said, we hope to continue those activities and hope to increase the number of samples that we do get, so that we can just run more tests and have more passive surveillance in St. Lucia. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for sharing your experience in St. Lucia. I know you are working very hard with the feral pigs, and you have many projects underway. Well, anyway, with this, we move into the question and answer session. I would like to invite all the excellent panelists who have spoken this morning and part of the afternoon. For Dr. Ferran, it is almost the evening, though. I invite you to join the panel. And without further ado, Dr. Campuzano is going to help me with the question session, as usual. Rocio, as usual, we can take turns with the questions, one for you, one for me. So what we will do is for Dr. Gregory, who must still be connected. All right, there you are. Dr. Gregory was responded several questions in the chat right from the beginning. But perhaps everyone in social media and everyone connected can hear the responses. We will ask again, Dr. Gregory, so that you can answer these again and everybody then can hear the answers. So, Dr. Campuzano, you start. Thank you. The first question is for Dr. Gregory. He already answered it, but I would like perhaps that the rest of the colleagues participating as attendees could have the opportunity to listen to this. This is from Martin Pastorino. How do hunters report the ill swine? How do they go about it?
If hunters come across sick or dead pigs, there's two avenues that I discussed in my presentation. Number one, they can go on the Protect Our Pigs website through USDA, and there's a directory of a wildlife services phone number that they can call. They can call a general number, as well as each state has their own wildlife services office that you can contact. On top of that, we also have the app called the Squeal on Pigs app that you can report a sighting of a pig as well and report anything that you see on the landscape. Dead pigs, sick pigs, or a fully healthy pig just found in areas where you may normally not see them. It is better to have too much information, whether we need it or not, than not enough.
The next question, Gregory, from Martin Pastorino also, who is asking, is there any training program for hunters? You did not read that, Rocio, did you? Okay. Is there any training program for hunters?
No, we do not generally have like big trainings or events for hunters. However, Wildlife Services does attend hunting events or conferences, things such as that, where we can provide outreach materials, information on pamphlets of impacts of feral swine, phone numbers they can call, opportunity to learn about the Squeal on Pigs app. So even though hunters don't always come to us for information, we will go to events and conferences to find hunters to provide an opportunity to give them outreach material so they can learn as much as possible, ask questions, and have resources to learn more or what have you. Yeah.
Gracias. La siguiente pregunta también ya fue
The
respondida.
next question has already been responded, but we would like to give the opportunity to all attendees to read about this. This is Patricia, who is congratulating you for an excellent presentation. And the question is, could you mention the mechanisms we could use to encourage the participation of hunters in surveillance activities?
To go back to my previous answer, we try to inundate and put ourselves out in events where a lot of hunters and trappers, fur bearers might find themselves, things that excite them. And that's where we can provide our outreach material. One thing that has also proven beneficial is we work very closely with landowners. So we are able to go on their property to remove feral swine, collect samples. Obviously, neighbors talk. And so when we are on one property, other individuals in the neighborhood get excited and very interested. And it's not uncommon for them to stop USDA Wildlife Services personnel and ask us questions where we can relay all of our information. Then that gains momentum over time. And all of a sudden, you have entire neighborhoods and many different people across counties, municipalities that all know that they can come to us. And that over time, they start becoming really aware of the programs that we have to reduce feral swine because they're invasive in the United States, as well as provide opportunities to collect samples.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you
Gregory.
very much, Gregory. Now, The next question, which has also been responded for Dr. Gustavo Castro, but I will pose it again so that you can hear the answer. Have you considered adding African swine fever as something to keep an eye on? This is an anonymous question, so there is no. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate all the speakers. This has been a very interesting session. I'm learning a lot of things at the same time. We can do PCR with our samples. We have considered examining samples.
Gracias, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Siguiente pregunta también.
Okay, the next question.
Bueno, le hacen unos reconocimientos.
Well, there are here acknowledgments from Dr. Pastorino, and there is also a question
Por ejemplo, Marisa Sánchez, que ya le
from
respondió, y
Ms.
también
Sanchez.
Pompón. Y hay una pregunta aquí.
There is a question here. Let's see.
Se toma para estas
What
enfermedades.
types of samples
Si no pronuncia bien el nombre de la
are taken for
anglo-saxón.
this? I do not know if I am pronouncing the last name appropriately. Well, there's one hunter from the Uruguayan Association of Hunters, and he is the one that is posing this question. We come up with different ways to contact all these people. Basically, we take samples of bodies, liver, heart, blood, to cover as many diseases as possible. Usually we go with a multidisciplinary team and we take those samples, but we take samples, muscle samples, etc. We get that to examine and process.
Acá tenemos más preguntas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castro. Here we have a few more questions. We have the question here. Well, it's many congratulations we're receiving here for the speakers. The next question would be addressed to Dr. Ferran Jorif by Pilar Pineda from Colombia. Greetings, Pilar. And she's asking, what motivation strategies have you used with hunters to promote their submittance of boar samples or the notification of dead animals? Can you hear me? The type of strategy depends on each country. I don't think that there is any universal formula. I think that it is also important to tell hunters that they are a fundamental element for following up on the diseases that can have an impact on their health when we're talking about zoonosis or which could have an impact in their surroundings. And they are stakeholders that can have a very significant role in the sample collection that nobody else can do. So I just would like to highlight that importance amongst hunters. That seems to be a strategy that really works. So this can be done participating in hunters conferences when they hold one, trying to participate with some kind of presentation to let others know how easy it can be in some cases to collect samples and the number and the amount of information that they can have to protect themselves from some diseases that it might be exposed to, such as the case of leptospirosis and others, and to write some paper for the magazines or the media. I think that these are all mechanisms that are a good motivation for this to be part of their routine for collecting samples in an easy way. I believe that the strategy of the filters really facilitate getting samples. There seems to be a strategy, but it is important facing African swine fever is not to wait for there to be a crisis to look for the hunters. I think that it is important to anticipate that situation and to begin convincing them that they can have a very important role in the follow-up of diseases of these wild population. I think that zoonosis and continuing with diseases that they can be exposed to that might affect their health, that would be a good starting point, but not the only one. Thank you very much, Doctor. The truth is that, yes, I think that you're right. That would be a good way to get them involved by warning them about possible risks when handling these wild animals, when getting into human health. I just want to invite the participants and tell them that you can continue asking. Please use the chat. We are on the Q&A section, and you can still pose new questions if you wish to do so. Go ahead. Thank you, yes. You can also say, I want to participate, and we can open up the mic if you prefer, so that you can also share your knowledge with us. The next question is also for Dr. Jory. It is it's from Chile, Julio Ursua. He says that your presentation was really interesting, and the question is, why in the past century the outbreaks that occurred in Europe were successfully eradicated? And why isn't the same thing happening with European outbreaks in this century, except for a few exceptions like the cases of Belgium and Sweden? This is a very good question. In fact, in the past century, the disease was introduced in Europe. It was successfully eradicated, and there were several reasons to explain this. In the first place, it is believed that the strain that was introduced at that time, which was genotype 1, was most likely less virulent than the ones that were introduced on this century. That might be a reason for that, but there are other reasons that can explain this. At that time, the displacement and the number of pigs in Europe, the consumption of pigs and the production of pigs was not the same as the one we currently have. And another supplementary element is the boar population since the past century has not ceased to increase for several reasons, but climate change, because winters are less and less cold, even though they are still cold enough for the carcasses to freeze, but they're not as cold as they used to be. There is enough survival of boars, and also the changes in agriculture have helped boars have food all year long. There is a serious problem now, which is that urban boars, they're used to live close to the city, to eat trash, to eat all year long. They have lost their fear of man, and that is a problem with urban boars, and that's happening in Europe, but not only in Europe. This is a phenomenon of an explosion in the boar population. There are so many more pigs in the genotype of the virus, which is more virulent, but the situation is no longer the same as it used to be in the past centuries. And of course, the fact that the disease entered through the east of Europe and the phenomenon of cold winters and the accumulation of the carcasses that facilitate the presence of the virus permanently, all this has caused the situation to be much more complicated than what it used to be. Thank you very much, Dr. Ferran. There is another question for you here from Elizabeth Chang. And it says, blood samples in filter paper stored at less than 40 degrees, how long can they be stored for diagnosis tests? The storage of 40 degrees or less than 40 is just for labs. The advantage of this technique is that these can be preserved at room temperature for quite a long time. Of course, it's better to keep it refrigerated, but stored frozen, well, they last less than sera. So if we want a sample to last for years, serum is a better sample frozen than filter paper. I don't know if this has been around like a year or two, but I could recommend that if what we want is to have a sample collection during some time, like to have a serum library, it's better with sera than with filter. That is good for very good sample analysis. Go ahead, Dr. Campuzano. Thank you very much. The next question is for Dr. Robin Joseph by Marisa Sanchez. She has a question about what is it that you do not have in your country, because the translation said that this spoke about feral pigs. So the question is, do you call feral pigs hybrids of domestic pigs and wild boars, or are you talking just about wild pigs or wild boars? Thank you, Dr. Robin.
Hi. So yes, in St. Lucia, we do not have wild boars. We have the domesticated pigs that have escaped from the farms, and they're now the feral pigs that we have. So they're just the normal pigs that you have in the livestock farms that have just escaped and now are feral. They've been out there for years and years and just been repopulating and making more of their own. So we don't have wild boars like with Europe, etc. in St. Lucia.
Muchísimas gracias, Robin, por la aclaración.
Thank you very much, Robin, for the clarification we have here. Well, first of all, congratulations. There are so many congratulations for all of you, for all the speakers. We have a congratulation by Dr. Lecuana from USDA Mexico. We also have congratulations from Dr. Rodriguez Lacan, who is part of the group. And here we have a question for Dr. Jory from Jose Miguel Carrizo. He is asking, for the case of detection and sampling and or handling by hunters, what biosecurity measures are established to prevent spreading out and for mitigating the disease? There are different measures that we can apply. In the first place, we can use disinfectants to disinfect boots, to disinfect all the material that might have been in contact with the animal remains or carcass.
La prevención y desinfección.
Prevention and disinfection with disinfectants that are recommended for the virus. That is very important. Special attention also for the cases of hunters who go and visit pig farms if they are pig growers themselves, to prevent all contact with domestic pigs, to prevent domestic pigs from accessing any meat or a piece of meat or materials that could have been in contact with the carcass. I don't know if the question was specifically referring to African swine fever or any other diseases. But anyway, a general way of doing this, that it is recommended that when manipulating any type of animal carcass or remains, to wear gloves and a mask. That would be the normal thing that could protect hunters from most of the diseases. Thank you very much, Dr. Jory. Yes, she was not referring to any specific disease, but I think that the recommendation anyway is valid for any type of disease. This way, we would be then closing our Q&A section. We want to thank you all for your wonderful presentations, for all the time that you have dedicated. Dr. Jory, you who have a very different time frame than the one we have here in Central America, thank you very much for being with us. And please be reminded that all these webinars are recorded, all these videos. If the speakers allow us, we're going to be uploading presentations to the platform. Here in the chat, we have been placing the link for the platform. I also invite you to open up the link of the survey. We're trying to get all your ideas, all your feedback of the impact that these webinars have had along these 3 years, more than 3 years that we have been preparing the whole area to prevent and respond to African swine fever. This is material that's worth gold in that platform, and we're really interested in knowing what you think about this. So please complete the survey, and there is an opportunity for you to say what other topics you need for an African swine fever and other cross-border diseases. So I invite you to fill them up, and we're going to be meeting again in May for the next webinar. We're going to be sending the invitations. Please disclose this material. I am so happy that we have had the Hunters Association with us, and to be able to have more and more audience like this, more different groups joining us. Thank you very much for disclosing this information, and please continue to do so. Thanks to all of the interagency group and the coordination. Once again, thanks to all of you, the experts who joined us, and to the whole ICA team that we have behind all these activities. Thank you very much, Dr. Campuzano. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all. This was great. I think that this is a very good topic, and definitely we're going to be continue having more information through the interest expressed by hunters and all the progress that we have. Thanks to all, Dr. Jory, Robin, and Gregory. Greetings. Have a great day and see you. Goodbye. See you next time. Great day to all.